Hello, welcome to my video presentation. My paper will discuss immigration as a whole instead of an actual immigrant in history. The sources I used in my paper will be used to explore the history of immigrants and the impact of their different cultures on evolution of the American way of life. These sources tend to look into the struggle that has prevailed between various cultures introduced into the United States by immigrants over time. One of the primary reasons put forth is that most of the immigrants in the United States had different reasons for their move into from their respective home countries. For example, John Butler mentions that the main factor that led to immigrants fleeing to America was because of the more prosperous opportunities, and I would also add that religious persecution was and is a primary reason as well. In the course of analyzing the sources, I noticed the unanimous observation by various scholars that there had been a constant, unspoken conflict between various cultures to establish which one was superior to the other. As a result, the text examined suggests that emerging cultures tended to have varying degrees of influence on the indigenous culture of the American population. Further, the sources agree on the fact that America is a multicultural nation founded on assimilation of different cultures of immigrants. Given this scholarly background, this presentation seeks to examine the evolution of American culture through the lens of immigration. I emphasize the notion that American culture is best understood as an amalgamation of the different cultures that gained their entry into the United States through immigration. It is important to take note of conflicting interests that have existed and perhaps continue to prevail as various cultures attempt to distinguish themselves from others in terms of perceived superiority. In so doing, I point to historically significant events such as the American Revolution and the Civil War. In my view, these wars were direct descendants of the conflict of different immigrant cultures. Possible outcomes of these two conflicts would definitely characterize these different immigrant cultures. I also highlight the roles played by different American movements mounted by immigrants to have their cultures recognized, despite the notable conflicts. For example, early American religious movements of the 18th and 19th centuries of America was changing rapidly. From the Puritans that landed on Plymouth Rock to the early colonies spreading across the Atlantic, each group had their own unique take on God, the church, the family, and their own community. During the 18th and 19th centuries, specifically, many religious movements took place that dramatically changed and shaped the America we know today. From 1700 to 1899, a great many changes occurred within the spiritual world. Of the many that came to pass, those that will be discussed in the following essay are the First Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening, and finally, the anti-Catholic sentiment and nativism. Another excellent example of a campaign inspiring change was the Civil Rights Movement, led and popularized by prominent leaders such as Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, among others. The agitation campaign for cessation of African Americans, segregation, and inclusion in mainstream American society. The movement, therefore, paved way for incorporation of diverse African American cultures into the larger American culture. Subsequent influential crusades were the student movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, and the women's movement. All of these movements supported derivatives of norms and ideals from diverse cultures. My primary argument, therefore, is that the success of different movements that sprouted from segregation by other cultures has had the biggest impact on the overall American culture. I have come to acknowledge that the fact that the reasons that migrants use to enter America remain valid to date, thus continuing immigration. As a result, immigration continues to redefine the composition of the country's populace and immigration admittance provisions in the Constitution. I also recognize the possibility that as long as religious or political persecution and economic disparities, among other reasons for relocation exist, immigrants from different cultures are going to continually shape America's culture. In addition, the absence of an original, hence communal, culture implies that the country's culture will continue being a combination of norms, ideals, and values adopted from varying cultural backgrounds. Overall, I believe many scholarly analysis and personal observations that the American culture comprises of different subcultures seeking common goals. Discussion of the controversial subject of immigration should therefore take place within the significant context of cultural and economic benefits brought by immigrants since the country's inception to date. Such discussion should also revolve around how to capitalize on these benefits. This can be achieved by improving immigrant standards of life through access to basic amenities like education, proper health care, and appropriate housing. That's the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.